G'day and welcome to Not the Farmer's Wife podcast. I'm CJ Steedman and I'm not the farmer's wife, I'm the farmer. I'm also a mum to MJ and OJ and a full-time off-farm worker. And like most farmers, I'm able to farm with the help of my family and my partner, who I call the handy helper. On Mojo Homestead, we grow chickens, goats, cows and bees, and we do it using regenerative agriculture and holistic management practices. If, like me, you love all things farming and homesteading, then we'd love to have you along for the ride. So let's get farming. G'day everyone and welcome to another episode of Not the Farmer's Wife. If you are watching on YouTube, no handy helper today, he's at work and we have a very busy weekend coming up. So I have decided to quickly record before the weekend because we will be at the Canberra show this weekend, which is very exciting. We've actually submitted some eggs to the show for judging, some blue eggs. Fingers crossed. We had a bit of a egg-tastrophe right before, the night before. We had some eggs put aside and some of them got cracked. So we couldn't submit them. So I was only able to submit 6 eggs instead of 12, which could disqualify us. But as the lady said when I dropped them off, put them in, we'll see what happens. Worst case scenario, we'll come third or not place at all because we didn't have enough eggs. It just depends how many people are in that category. So we're in the category of unusual coloured eggs. So duck eggs, blue eggs, quail eggs, things like that. We didn't have, I just wasn't confident enough our other eggs were good enough, our Australorp eggs. We've had some issues with eggshells lately and that's perfect timing because this week we are talking about nutrition, and nutrition has a lot to do with eggshells. So at the moment, you would be aware there is a gazillion shortages in shops. And look, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I've seen photos of eggs stacked up in warehouses. Whether they're current photos or not, I don't know. Whether the shops are just playing silly buggers with us, I don't know. But if you are in doubt in any way, shape or form, that you have 2 options. Find a local supplier who can get you your eggs, like we do with our customers, or grow your own, in which case I've got some tips for you. So this week's episode 104, and we're talking all about nutrition. Better feed equals better eggs. And certainly, like I said, eggshell problems usually come down to nutrition. So let's launch into it. Look, probably I want to say one thing right off. Oh, before I get started, actually, for those that are watching on YouTube, I will hold up a book to the video monitor. The book is out. Ditch the store from brooder to plate. The step-by-step guide to raising chickens for meat is out on Kindle now. So if you haven't gone and had a look at it, go and have a look. If you are a Kindle Unlimited member, don't forget, at the moment, you can still get it for free. And hopefully by next month, this time next month, the step-by-step guide to raising chickens for eggs will be out as well. So if you're not interested in raising chickens for meat, that's fine. Wait a little bit longer and there'll be another book out about raising chickens for eggs. So one of the things that I always say to people, and I have had a few people broach this with me where they've had problems, and I speak 100% from experience on this one. We got a new clutch of chickens. They were day olds. We raised them up, got them out in the paddock. They'd been on chick starter, like every other chicken to start with, and we had been feeding a lot of scratch mix at that time. This is going back a few years before we knew a lot better. And we were feeding a lot of scratch mix. We were feeding layer pellets as well, but heavy doses of scratch mix. And we weren't getting eggs. We got 0 eggs coming in. These chickens were they hadn't clicked over into that laying phase. And they got to 18 weeks, nothing. They were eyes are brown, so 18 weeks they should be laying. They got to 20 weeks, nothing. We got to 23, 24 weeks, still nothing. And I'm like, shit, what's going on here? Like these chickens they're all hens. They should be laying. They're out in the paddock. They're living with the other girls with our Australorps. Our Australorps are laying. The Isa Browns just weren't laying. I started doing some research and, you know, this is where I say I speak from experience because I have fucked up before anybody else has fucked up. And sometimes you've got to go and dig. Scratch mix is not the ideal chicken feed. And so what I was doing was basically giving the chickens chicken candy and wondering why they weren't laying eggs. It'd be like giving an elite sports person junk food and processed crap and saying, go out there and do your best. Wasn't going to work. So, nutrition. Why does it matter for laying hens? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One is with the right amount of nutrients, they will lay, their body will do what it's designed to do, which is lay eggs on a regular basis. So that could be 4 eggs a week, it could be 6 or 7 eggs a week. Their body will regulate how many eggs they're meant to be laying, depending on their breed, depending on their size, depending on their age. Now, sometimes when they first start, you might get a few little fairy eggs, we call them. They're just tiny little eggs. And that's okay. That's just their body learning how to make eggs. As they get older and as they get more into the process, the egg size will increase. And usually you'll end up with quite large eggs, which is insane how large they get. Some of our Australorp girls who are like 5, 6 years old are laying these massive eggs. So they need nutrients to lay eggs. But what they also need is to lay a healthy, good, solid egg. So an egg with a really good yellow yolk with lots of nutrients in it, because eggs are like a little superfood. They're little bundles of vitamins. But also to have a good consistent white, a white that sits around the yolk instead of just spreading everywhere, and a good eggshell. Now, good eggshell is important because the eggshell is what protects the yolk and the white so that it keeps it nice and healthy and safe for us humans to consume. So without a good amount of nutrition, they end up with weak shells, deformed shells, and, we'll talk a bit more about shells in a minute, but you can have deformed shells and not have a nutritional deficiency. But for the most part, if you want shells that are good, solid, healthy shells, then a good nutrition rate is what you need. It also takes a lot of energy to produce eggs. Chickens, like all females, have hens, I should say, like all females, have a certain number of eggs within their system, within their oviduct. And I think it's oviduct. I think that's the correct word for it. And those, so they have a certain number that will do their lifetime. Like us, we are born with, excuse me, let me get the yawns. We're born with a certain number of eggs. Hens are too. But for them to be good quality eggs and to pass through their system in an efficient manner and not have problems laying their eggs, which, we'll talk about a bit later as well, but egg bound is an issue that can come from their system just not regulating the way that it's supposed to. They need nutrition for that. So what do they need to actually make them work? Well, before we discuss that, let's talk about the digestive system, because a lot of people get confused. Chickens are the closest relative to modern day, or they're the closest relative to ancient dinosaurs. So they're like a modern day dinosaur. They're a true omnivore. They will eat anything that comes their way. Meat, vegetable, grubs, dirt, rocks. They'll eat anything. Whatever they need to survive, they will get their nutrients. So they don't have teeth, they have a beak, they peck at their food, their tongue pushes their food down into their gullet and into their crop. So first it goes into the crop, and the crop is the big thing that sits at the front of their neck, and it kind of fills up with food and then slowly passes food down into the stomach. And when it passes down into the stomach, it goes in there for digestion. And in the gizzard is where you might have heard about birds having little stones that they'll swallow and little bits of shell and things like that. In the gizzard is where they keep those things. So because they don't have teeth, they're eating their food whole. And so like a big chunk of pellet is going straight in and into their crop. Once it passes from the crop into the gizzard contains stones and shells. So oyster shells are a good example of that, but also tiny little pebbles and rocks. They will actually eat them and keep them in that gizzard part. When the food goes in there, the rocks and shell will grind on the food and break it down so that they can digest it. It sounds really weird. If you've ever cut a chicken open, you can go in and have a look, and it's quite weird how there'll be little bits of rock sitting in their gizzard. But it's very interesting if you're into that kind of thing. Then once it's all ground down, that's when it passes through and goes into their intestines, and the nutrients are absorbed into their body out of that because the food's broken down now and it can be absorbed more readily. Now, the funny bit about chickens is when it passes through and they have their waste coming out the other end, they don't actually pee. Like I always say chicken pee and poop, but it comes out as a one mass. So the liquid that's passing through their system and the waste food that's passing through their system all comes out in one dump, which is chicken poop. So that's the uric acid and the poop coming out together. And sometimes you'll see it's a different colour too, white and green and things like that. People get all worked up about it, but don't stress. So long as there's not a bundle of worms in there, and so long as the poop isn't like complete diarrhea and it's like a little solid, kind of proper poop coming out, then you should be fine. But that system of absorbing the nutrients is what helps them produce their eggs. So what do they actually need? Well, when they're starting out, and we're not going to talk too much about day olds and things like that, but obviously they can't eat a pellet and digest it without any problems because it would be too big for them because their bodies are only tiny when they're day old. But we're talking about layer chickens here. So layer hens eat a pellet of food and that is fine. They can eat crumble, they can eat mash, and all of those foods are fine so long as they have the correct nutritional requirements. And the big one is protein, 16 to 18%. Some people say 19%. I did read a study that there's an egg board page in Australia, and I read a study and they looked at whether or not extra protein made any difference to egg laying. And newsflash, extra protein makes zero difference to egg laying at all. They need a certain amount in order to produce a healthy egg, but giving them more protein, thinking that might be better, it actually doesn't do anything for them, and it can have some adverse health effects. So don't stress if you look and go, oh, my layer pellets are only 17%. That's fine. Anywhere between 16 and 19% is going to be okay. It's if you drop below that 16%. You don't really want to go lower than that. The main thing is to make sure that they are getting enough protein. If they're getting enough protein, everything else will be fine. Now, I always say, and I said it before at the beginning, chicken candy is a no-go. Don't feed scratch mix as their only source of food. There is not enough nutrition in scratch mix to cover off on layer chicks. So just don't do it. I don't buy scratch mix at all now. It's too expensive for the fact that it doesn't really produce the kind of results that I'm after. Layer pellets are specifically designed. Now, if you want to go into the ins and outs and make your own pelleted food for your chickens, or, try and give them food that is sufficient without feeding pellets, please do your research. Chickens need a lot of different food. And please do not try and feed them vegan food. It is not suitable for an omnivore. They are a true omnivore. They need meat and protein. And look, don't get me wrong, they can get protein out of wheat and things like that. But the protein that they need, being an omnivore, they love meat. Our chickens will chase field mice around their paddock and catch them and then fight over who's going to eat them. So don't think for a second that these little dinosaurs aren't going to eat meat. We throw carcasses out there. We throw scrambled eggs out there if they're a bit low, and I'll talk about that later, but they absolutely need a high quality protein. Now, layer pellets are designed for it. They're the best quality that you can buy in the easiest format. Like I say, if you want to go into making your own chicken food, please do your research and make sure that you're covering off on all the nutritional requirements. Otherwise, you just won't get really good eggs. You'll get sick chicks and the eggs won't be fantastic. Now, different sources of protein that you can look at are things like mealworms, black soldier fly larvae, which I have seen people very successfully grow themselves to feed to their chickens. It can be quite effective. Scrambled eggs, as I said, in the past, when we've been a bit short on food and we've been a bit worried about how much protein they're getting, we have cooked up a whole bunch of scrambled eggs and fed it back to them, and they absolutely annihilate it. They love it. Fish meal is another one. Sunflower seeds, peas, any green leafies are good. There's not a lot of protein in vegetable matter. So getting that higher quality protein into them has to come usually from an animal source. And anybody that's listened to me for a while knows that I tend towards carnivore myself anyway. But definitely for chickens, I've got videos where I've seen people feed a carcass that's been stripped of meat and put it out for their chickens, and the chickens go nuts for it. They absolutely love it, and the following eggs that you'll get out of that will be amazing. Now, other people on the web you go and Google it, people will stand there and say, do not feed your chickens raw meat, do not give them raw meat, whatever you do, don't give them raw meat, it'll make them sick. Our chickens eat raw meat when they catch a mouse in the paddock, so I'm not too worried about them having raw meat. But I've also seen a lot of homesteaders successfully feed carcasses to chickens, and the result is amazing quality eggs and really healthy chicks. So do your research. I'm no vet nurse. I should have probably said that at the beginning. I'm not a veterinary science expert. I'm not a vet. I'm not a vet nurse. I'm just somebody who's had the experience of dealing with chickens in the paddock. So do your research, but honestly, they need protein. And if meat, we know that meat's the best source of protein for us. We get the highest quality for the lowest output or lowest input, whichever way you want to look at it. Like a piece of steak, you'll get so much more nutrients out of that than if you eat, a pound of baby spinach to get the same amount of protein. So definitely consider doing that with your chickens if you're in a situation where you can do it. Now, during molting season, so usually in the middle of winter, chickens will molt. They will lose their feathers. They will have a bit of it's almost like a sabbatical where they regenerate what's kind of working for their body and what's not working. And they will lose their feathers, essentially. You'll see them get really patchy with their feathers. They go off the lay. They stop laying completely, usually during their molt. Not all birds, but most of them. If they're going through that phase, they generally need a bit more protein. And the only reason for that is because they're trying to regrow feathers. They're trying to reset their systems to lay eggs again. And if you don't give them enough protein during that period, it can be a bit of a struggle for them. And you can sometimes find that the molt period will go a lot longer. It realistically should only last 2 to 3, maybe 4 weeks at the outside. But in the past, when our feed quality hasn't been great, I've noticed that it stretches out to 5 or 6 weeks without eggs and with them still trying to recuperate and grow those feathers back. So more protein during that period is not a bad thing. Like I say, more protein, the studies that they've done, more protein doesn't make better quality, more eggs, anything like that. It actually has zero impact on production of eggs, but it can have some impact on their health. So overfeeding protein long-term is bad. Overfeeding protein during the molt period is not considered a bad thing because it does help them give that boost. What else have I got here on my list? Obviously, having that extra protein too helps them to grow really healthy feathers. And you want your chickens to look good. I mean, our chickens, even our Isa Browns, which I consider to be the most ordinary looking out of our chickens, we still want them to look good. They still need to have nice, shiny, healthy feathers and things like that. Now, the next thing to talk about is calcium. They absolutely need calcium. Calcium is what forms the outer of the shell when they lay their eggs. And if they're deficient in calcium, you will know pretty quick because the eggshells will suddenly start to crack more often. They'll be a bit thin. You might get what we call the paper shells, which when you hold the egg, it's you can almost pinch the skin. It's so soft. The shell is so soft. It's just like a membrane around the yolk and the white. So they absolutely need calcium in order to make those really good shells. And I think I've got here eggshells are 95% calcium. So that's how much they need. They need a lot to go in order to do that. Now, your best choices are crushed oyster shells are a really good source of calcium for chickens. And you can buy that from the Tractor Supply or local produce shop. But also, if you wanted to do it from home, if you're trying to, ditch the store and avoid having to buy more stuff, crushed eggshells. So all you do is keep your eggshells from eggs that you've used, keep them separate. Now, the best way of doing it is to bake them in the oven. And the only reason you bake them in the oven is the heat will kill any kind of bacteria on the outside of the shell. So bake them in the oven, just until they're crunchy. What I do for those that have Thermomixes who are part of the Thermomix cult, I drop my eggshells into the Thermomix and give it a quick blitz, and it just breaks them down into these tiny little particles. And then I offer that to my chickens in a bowl in their shed. So in their tractor, they have a little bowl that has oyster and, well, we use oyster and it's a grit that we get from the produce shop. But if I don't have any of that, I will break up eggshells and do it that way. And crushed eggshells, feeding them back to them, it will not encourage them to peck at their own eggs so long as you have broken it right up and it doesn't resemble an eggshell. I would never feed eggshell back to them just as a whole eggshell because it always worries me that they'll start pecking at it, think, oh, that tastes all right and that feels good for me. It makes me feel good. And then they may develop a bit of a habit of pecking at their own eggshells when they've just laid them. I've never proven that, but I'm going to go with that anyway. Now, like I said, if you are deficient or if they're deficient in their calcium, you'll get soft shells, you'll get shellless eggs. So sometimes they can lay like just a blob that looks like an egg yolk. Or you sometimes get them eating their own eggs. So if you've got a girl that's eating her own eggs and breaking open your eggs before you can go and collect them, which is really annoying, if you've got one doing that, then I would suggest trying to up the calcium in the yard and see if that stops that behaviour. It doesn't always. Sometimes it's a habit rather than a medical or nutritional issue. Sometimes it's just a chicken being lazy and nasty and deciding to ruin your day when you go out to get an egg and it's already cracked open and eaten. Now, the next thing is grit. They have to have grit. Like I spoke about at the beginning, they have their gizzard, which has little stones and shells and things like that in it. And without those stones and shells in there, they can't break the food down. If they can't break their food down, they can't absorb the nutrients out of the food if it's just in big chunks. So there's insoluble grit, which is just small rocks, and they do most of the grinding. Now, chickens will peck at the ground. If they're free-range chickens, they'll peck at the ground and they will swallow little pieces of rock when they find it. But if you can offer them, and the bag, I have to try and take a photo and find it. The bag that you buy, it says oyster shell and grit. So it's a combination of the two, the oyster shell for the calcium, the grit being the little stones, the grit, what they call grit is the little stones. And you put that just free range in a bowl in their shed, and they will go and eat at it as they need it. So they will self-regulate how much stone, grit, shell they need in their gizzard in order to break down their food. Now, the soluble grit is the actual oyster shells. So that goes in and it actually breaks down and the calcium goes into their system. But the combination of the little stones and the shell will help break down food that's sitting in their gizzard. Now, sometimes they can develop a thing called sour croup, and sour croup just means that there's a bit of a blockage in there. It doesn't mean the gizzard's not working, but offering extra stone and extra shell can sometimes help push things through a sour croup into the gizzard. Sour croup is a condition, and we won't go into that. That would be a whole episode on health issues. But yeah, certainly if they've got enough shell and stone in their gizzard, then the chances of them getting sour croup is, or if they're being offered enough, the chance of them getting sour croup is a lot less. But sour croup can happen for other reasons too. So one of the things I would always say to people is don't feed bread to chickens. People think that going and getting bread from the local bakery and breaking it up and feeding it to their chickens is great. It's a processed food, and I don't think humans should be eating that much bread. I mean, we have sourdough here. We don't eat a lot of processed bread, but processed bread, I can't think of it being good for anybody. So the idea of feeding something to my chickens that I myself won't eat is a little bit off for me. So if you do choose to go down that path, please do it in moderation, because anytime I have had bread, and we used to get scraps from the local takeaway for the chickens, anytime I have fed excess amounts of bread to the chickens, they've all seemed to have little issues with their croups. So just putting that out there. Now, backyard chickens, if they're free-range chickens, if your chickens are not locked in a coop all the time, they will find their own grit and their own shells at times. But offering extra is always a good thing, and it's never going to hurt them to do that. So definitely have that supplement there for them. Fresh water. Oh my God. It's the bane of our existence at the moment here. We're in not a drought, a little bit of a dry spell. It's probably the best way of putting it, says me as I take a sip of water. It's a little bit dry here at the moment. The dams are a little bit low. So we've had to be really conscious of how much water we're putting out. But you can't skimp on water. Chickens, and we have made the mistake before when we didn't have quite the pattern happening, and when I was working full-time in an office and the handy helper was working full-time, off the farm, we would sometimes miss the fact that the water was getting a bit low. Every time it has happened, the girls have stopped laying for a day. Afterwards, the next day after they've had low water, we get 1 or 2 eggs instead of our usual 12, 15 eggs. They just stop. So don't let them run out of water. Now, the best system, and it's not one that we use because ours are out in a paddock, so it makes it a little bit hard, but we are trying to get it sorted. And when we do, I'll let you know, because we'll probably try and offer them for sale as well. We're trying to come up with a tub system that has little water feeders off the side of it. And the reason for that is, at the moment we've got a tub that we use, and they stand in the tub, and they shit in the tub, and they drop food in the tub, and they scratch things into the tub, and the water gets dirty. And then we're constantly cleaning the tub out. So the best system is a system where they are able to get water out of a feeder without standing in it, shitting in it, scratching stuff into it. And that's the same for food feeders as well. You want their water to be a really clean, good supply of water, and it has to be in abundance. There has to be no risk that they're going to run out of water. You really can't afford to have them run out of water. It's not good for them. It's not good for egg development. I have got here a little hot tip. In hot weather, they can drink in excess of 2 cups each per day. So that doesn't sound like a lot, but we're only talking about a small bird, remember. Winter tips for people. We don't have water freezing over here. Sometimes the top surface of the water will freeze over, but the whole tub won't freeze. If you live in a snowy environment, for my friends up in North America, have a heater system in your water. And you would, if you're out on a homestead, you would have a heated water system for other animals, I would imagine. So just make sure that you've got that for the chickens. They'll peck at ice, but they need fresh water that's not frozen. If you are like us in an environment where the top layer will freeze over, all we do is go around to all our water troughs of a morning through winter, particularly when we've had a frost overnight, and we have a old mattock handle, old axe handle, and we just smash the top of the ice to allow it to allow the animals to get to the water without the ice blocking them. It can be a bit of a pain in the ass. So a heated system would be awesome, but we just don't. We're off grid anyway, so we don't have the power supply. But also too, we don't freeze enough here. We don't get that solid block of ice kind of thing. Now, as I said, elevated watering systems that they can't stand in is your best option. Once we get our system sorted a bit better, I will post and I'll let you know what we've decided with. We're tinkering with a few different water feeders at the moment, because some are better than others. And don't get me wrong, they're all made in China. So even the ones that say made in the USA or made in Australia, they're made in China. They just put them together here in Australia. So once we've got it sorted, we'll let you know. Healthy treats for your chickens. Did you know that some things chickens can't eat? They're omnivores, but there are some things. So really good things for laying hens would be things like fruits, watermelons, berries, bananas. Some people back away from apples because the seed in the apple contains some cyanide, but seriously, they would have to eat like thousands of seeds per bird to get too much cyanide. I mean, same goes for humans. Veggies. Cucumbers are a good choice. They're really watery, so that's a good kind of source for the chickens as well of water. Keep their hydration up. Leafy greens. Any kind of greens generally are going to be good for chickens. Spinach, kale. Ugh, I couldn't eat kale if you paid me, but I could grow kale just for the chickens. Microgreens, if you are that way inclined, and we'll talk about, some other options a bit further down as far as winter adjustments. Pumpkins, now this could be a complete urban myth, but I've heard that pumpkin seeds work as a natural dewormer for chickens. So that's probably something to do a little bit more research on. But things like pumpkins, they absolutely love. If you have a pumpkin that's gone a bit soft, cut it open, chuck it out in the paddock, they will devour it. Mind you, there's lots of things chickens will devour no matter what you put out there. Grains. We're not big grain eaters here ourselves, but certainly oats. And I have looked at, and I was talking to somebody online about the other day, somebody mentioned about feeding over winter and what if you can't get to the feed store and things like that. Scratch mix, if you had grainy kind of scratch mix, so corns, oats, wheat, things like that, and put it in a jar with some water and let it sprout. Now, there's nothing wrong with feeding them grains, but what I have found is that horses, cows, goats, chickens, when they're all fed grain, they get fat, and it's like a layer of fat, not a healthy fat. So I tend not to feed them straight up grains, and that's why I say I don't feed scratch mix, but using it as a sprouted version, I've heard really good things about that, and that it kind of breaks down the nutrients a bit before they eat it, so then it's more bioavailable to them. There's a big word for you. It's more readily available. They can digest it better in their system. So if you've got scratch mix left over that you don't want to feed them as scratch mix, chuck it in a thing of water, let it sprout a couple of days. Make sure you change the water every day, kind of thing, just like you would with sprouts if you were growing them for yourself. And chuck them out to the chooks as a bit of a treat, particularly if they're going through a molt or it's the middle of winter and they're just not getting real access to good quality greens. Now, foods to avoid. And this is always controversial. So I'll give the pre-disclaimer now. There's lots of things on this list that I have fed to my chickens without a problem. However, some people will say, do not feed them. You need to do the research and work out what's best for your chickens. I'm not going to tell you one way or another, but I'll give you the reasons why. So, avocados. We are big avocado eaters in this household. So the fleshy green part of the avocado evidently is fine for them to eat. It's the skin and the seed, and they contain a toxin which I'm not even going to try and pronounce, but they contain a toxin, and when chickens eat them, particularly if they're eating a lot of them, it can rise to levels that are too high for birds. That being said, my girls have had avocado skins go out where the kids have, like, MJ loves avocados. She will cut them up and she automatically puts any kind of food scraps into the food scrap bucket for the chickens. So she's put avocado skins in before, and it's not until I throw the tub out to the chickens that I look and go, oh shit, there's avocado skins in there. I've got to be honest, they just don't eat them. They just avoid them. It's like they know that they're not really suitable for them, so they just walk away. Green potato skins. Now, my understanding, and certainly in my learnings about carnivore diet, is there are a lot of toxins in plants. Plants are, their only self-defense mechanism is toxins. So green potatoes are huge in toxins. People shouldn't eat them. People shouldn't eat green potatoes. But if you have green potatoes because they haven't been processed right when they've come out of the ground, and you've peeled as much of the skin off as you can in order to try and use the potato, and God knows we've all done it, because I've certainly ruined more than a couple of batches of potatoes coming out of the ground. It contains a thing called solanine. Solanine, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, and it is toxic to birds. So same as it's toxic to humans, it's toxic to birds. If you've got green potato skins, you're probably better off just chucking them into the compost pile. Onions and garlic. Go figure. And I have got a little note here that there is some conjecture online about whether or not it affects egg flavour, feeding them large amounts of garlic and onions. Now, my girls have gotten garlic bits, usually the skins, or any garlic cloves that have gone a bit soft. I'll chuck them in the chook bucket. So they get them all the time, and we've not had a problem. I wouldn't say that I feed them huge quantities of onion, and I must be honest, like the avocado skins, they tend to leave onion skins. They don't seem to want to eat them. So maybe they know that they're not good for them. But I've definitely fed them to them, and I haven't had any birds keel over from having been fed it. As far as it affecting the egg flavour, not so sure about that. That might be a little bit of furphy. That might be a bit of an urban myth. Chocolate and caffeine. Oh my God. Why would I feed chocolate to chickens? I would eat it myself. Same with caffeine, because I think I'm on my third cup of coffee already today. Both toxic to chickens. That being said, chocolate is toxic to dogs as well. And why would anybody waste good chocolate on an animal when you can eat it yourself? If you're like me and you like chocolate, then you wouldn't do that. Caffeine, I have heard of people using coffee grounds on the floor of chicken coops. So just saying that doesn't seem to be a problem when it's done like that. Now, maybe it's just because the chickens don't eat it. They don't peck at it and eat it. If it's on the ground, it's just considered to be dirt, so they don't touch it. But evidently it's toxic. So free ranging is obviously the best way to go if you can possibly do that. So if your girls are able to go out and forage for themselves and peck at plants and peck at grubs and bugs and things like that. Now, there are a very long list of plants that are toxic to chickens, including things like death cap mushrooms, which are toxic to everything. But there are a long list. And what I would say to you is if you have your girls in a very small confined space, go through online, Google it, and have a look at what the toxic plant list is. I might try and add it to the show notes for you. Have a look. And if you've got anything like that, probably just don't grow it in your backyard where your chickens are. If you really like the plant, grow it in your front yard where your chickens probably aren't going to be. Or if you're on a big property, grow it somewhere where you know the chickens are not likely to free range. And that's, at the end of the day, I think most chickens are smart enough to know what plants they should be eating, which ones they aren't. So they do tend to avoid them. We've had issues in the paddock here with death cap mushrooms. We had 2 goats that we lost in quick succession. And because one of them was perfectly healthy and in the middle of a milking cycle, I asked the vet to do an autopsy on her because we were worried that it might have been something contagious. And he came back to me and said she had acute kidney and liver failure, which when we dug a bit deeper, we realised that death cap mushrooms are one of the things that will cause that symptom. And she hadn't eaten anything else. We've had mushrooms growing in the paddock and that's it. Now, mushrooms growing in your paddock are a sign of good soil health, but not death cap mushrooms. We now just crush every mushroom we see in that paddock. When the mushrooms come up, Handy Helper and I walk around, we just crush them with our boot because we don't want to risk the girls eating them. But I've also never seen a goat eat a mushroom that's sprung up out of the paddock. They just tend to avoid them. So giving them that free range ability to be able to go and source their own greens and their own bugs and things like that is going to give you the best quality eggs. And we've discussed that. I think we discussed it on the first of these 4 episodes, that egg quality from free range chickens is so much higher than chickens that are kept in a barn situation or cage situation. And it's because of their varied diet. So giving them a varied diet, even though I say feed layer pellets, feed layer pellets, feed layer pellets, giving them, microgreens, giving them baby spinach, giving them leftover fruit, giving them meat sources, that gives them that varied diet as well. But allowing them to go and find their own bugs and grubs and things like that will give them the varied diet. So if you can at all free range, or at least a couple hours a day, let them free range, then go for it. It will also bring down some of your feed costs. If they're getting a really big quantity of free range items that they're finding themselves, and it's a chicken's nature to forage. So to me, I feel like it encourages them to be more chickeny, to be out there and foraging. But it will definitely bring down your feed costs if they've got a large area to free range. If they're in a small area, like I said, just be careful with what plants you've got growing there. Use chicken tractors where the floor is mesh, where you can move them to different areas of grass so that they can find their own bugs and things like that. But as I said to this lady the other week who was asking about, what to feed at times when you can't get to the feed store, if you can make up a tray of microgreens and drop that in there to feed to them, they will dig apart all the soil at the bottom as well because they'll be looking for bugs for free range, but they'll eat the microgreen sprouts, which are really dense nutrition. Even though they still have some toxins in them, they're very dense nutritionally, so that's a really good thing for chickens. Now, seasonal adjustments for weather. And this obviously is very, very varied depending on where you live. So if you're in a really strong snow climate, then things will be different for you. But in a winter diet, you may want to add some scratch mix. And the only reason for that is that keeping warm will make their bodies work harder. They'll probably go into a longer period of molt, and giving them scratch mix will just help fatten them up a little bit. It'll give them a little extra layer to help them then work on absorbing all that protein out of their layer pellets to keep healthy feathers, keep healthy eggs happening. You can feed extra protein and fat. Things like sunflower seeds are really good because the sunflower oil is really good for them, to try and keep their weight up during that winter period. Giving warm mash, so chicken feed as a mash, maybe mixed in with milk or something like that, something that has a really high nutritional quality to it, or fermented feed. So fermented veggies, if you've got leftover sauerkraut or anything like that you've made for yourself, by all means chuck that in, because that kind of fermented food is always good for them. Keeping them warm is another thing, and we did discuss it in the coops last week, but feeding them warm food is going to help as well. So warming foods. Summer diet. If you're in a really hot tropical area, water, more water. Hydration is everything. Make sure they don't run out of water. If they run out of water, they won't be happy campers. You can do cooling treats as well in a really hot environment. So things like a block of ice where you've frozen grapes in it, or corn, or any kind of fruit or vegetable into it, and frozen it as a block and leave that out in their pen. They will peck at the ice, which will be lovely and cooling for them and hydrating. And then they'll get frozen treats when they get, after they get through it. I tend to give less. If I'm going to give scratch mix, I would give less in summer, because it's a heating food. It's a warming food, and you probably don't want the little bodies overheating in those really hot climates. Also things like watermelons. We used to give the chooks, we'd cut up a watermelon and just drop it in there. And because it's such a watery fruit, they would peck at it and they'd get that extra hydration out of it. And obviously during molting season, when they're trying to grow new feathers and they're trying to get their egg cycles back happening again, just to up the protein just a little bit for them then. Now, I think I'm nearly done. And I was just having a look to see if there's anything else. So don't feed scratch mix unless you're in the middle of winter, they're molting, and you're trying to put a bit of weight on them. Stay away from scratch mix. It's chicken candy. They really don't need it. Good quality layer pellets with a good quality protein source in it. Make sure that they've got access to oyster shell and grit, a mix of. If they're not free ranging, then definitely get one from the feed store. If they're free ranging, you might only have to just do your own eggshells baked and crumbled to give them that extra calcium. Water, make sure they've always got water. And one thing I didn't mention was crowding at feed stations. Look, when you've got a large quantity of chickens, sometimes you can get a dominant hen who pushes the others away from the feed area. Just be mindful, keep an eye on that. If that happens, you may need to set up 2 feed stations, which there's no harm in doing that. It just means that, when, Mavis is standing at the feed station and doesn't want Betsy to come over and eat, she can go and eat at the other one. And just makes life a little bit easier for everybody. Now, another thing I didn't mention was sticking to the one type of feed. If you chop and change between different feed brands, generally they're going to be pretty close. But what I have noticed is sometimes my girls will go off the lay when I have done a big change of feed, where I've stopped, like I normally buy the Lucky Layer because it's the cheapest with the right amount of protein in it. But if I chop and change between Lucky Layer and some of the other brands, my girls sometimes get a bit of an upset stomach. I think they look like they're a little bit runny on the bottom, and the eggs drop off for a couple of days. And it comes back up again, but it just takes them a couple of days for their body to adjust and get used to it. So just take that into account when you're doing it. And I think that is just about it. I'm just looking. That is everything. Now, as I said at the beginning, don't forget that there's a book coming out. This one is already out and going. So you can go and purchase that on Amazon. Now, I have got an Australian version. Amazon and Kindle really threw me for six. You can't do standard colour print books in Australia. You can only do premium colour print books. Now, I picked standard because I was trying to keep costs down for everybody. I didn't want to make it so expensive that it priced people out of being able to get it. So I selected standard print, colour print. Then worked out that I can't do that in Australia. It's only available in America. So for my American friends, go buy it, cheap as chips at the moment. For my Australian friends, it's probably a little bit dearer than what it should be, but it's only $1 or $2, and I have kept the overheads as low as I possibly can. So I'm making bugger all out of the book. And as I said, if you're a Kindle Unlimited member, go and get it for free. Download it on your e-reader, have a read of it. If you like it, then go and buy the hard copy. Or just keep it as a Kindle Unlimited version on your e-reader. The book, Step-by-Step Guide to Keeping Chickens for Eggs, will be coming out real soon. I am 3/4 of the way through it. I've still got to edit it and do all that kind of stuff, but it's nearly there. So bear with me, guys, and it will be there in the not too distant future. Anyway, that's it for me. I'm going to go try and polish up this because I had to stop it a few times. I had chooks and goats going off outside, and I will talk to you all again next week. Bye for now. Thank you so much for listening. From all of us at Mojo Homestead, we really hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you did, I ask just one small favour. Please subscribe and leave a review. Reviews help small podcasts like mine be more visible, so more people will know about us and be able to listen in. And don't forget to head over www.mojohomestead.net/launch and check out our freebies. We love helping families start their homesteading journey. Remember, life's too short for store-bought eggs.